As your textbook explains, this is a period characterized by a search and a celebration of order. But that means it also comes with a particular obsession with heresy. And I want to explain why, because it is not a surprise that it emerges at the same time. Now, in this moment, the most important medieval institution and the oldest is the church. This is when the power of rule, in fact, defines and redefines itself, notably in England and France. So it's not just the church that is important, but Orthodox Christianity as interpreted by the church. By the 11th century, medieval Christianity was composed of a body of faith drawn from several sources: Holy Scriptures, Church Fathers, popes and papal declarations, numerous ecclesiastical councils, and the clergy. Think of the sic et non or disputation. What resulted was Christian dogma, a set of beliefs to which every Christian would offer their acceptance. This was roughly summed up by the Trinity, creation, and the fall, the doctrine of original sin devised by St. Augustine. Incarnation, the church, and last judgment. However, in practice, while the church was trying to define its orthodox message, from the very beginning, people and movements from within reinterpreted Christian message and emphasized different aspects of Christianity. So as long as the church had existed, there had also been heresies. That is, dissent from the church, which, if you remember, dissent would mean damnation, for there was no salvation outside the church. Heresy, which comes from the Latin, means treason to God. It would be the worst offense in medieval Christian society. Heresy also meant contamination, an infection from which true believers had to protect themselves. For the Middle Ages, heresy was a doctrinal error held stubbornly in defiance of the church. This means the church accepted doctrinal mistakes, but not holding on to them. So, for instance, Gratian, who taught law at Bologna in the 12th century, argued that heresy was the rejection of orthodox doctrine after correction was offered. And this is why the Inquisition was important, and in part inspired by the logic of disputation. So think of this paradox, that at the same time that Europe was self-confident, wealthy, and the church was doing well, firmly at the center of every person's life, this is also a time when the church becomes extremely concerned with heresy and unleashes all of its power and even violence against any form of heresy. And I will discuss this later. So this was the official definition of heresy, but in practice, heresy meant much more. A person could choose to become a heretic or considered one out of intellectual concern. Remember, this is the moment when scholars apply logic to theological issues, and Abelard had to burn his own book. Or they could become a heretic to resist or protest church authority and organization. A woman could become a heretic because the church refused to allow women as clergy, unlike ancient Christianity. In short, heresy had as much to do with social, political, and intellectual reasons as it had to do with strictly religious and theological ones. There had always been heresies, but there were especially numerous ones that appeared in the 12th and the 13th centuries. And these heresies had some common characteristics: a desire to return to the practices of early Christianity, a need and desire to free Christians from their enslavement to the material world, a protest against the concentration of the authority of the church, a challenge to the sacraments, especially baptism, and an emphasis on chastity, preaching, communal life, and purity. And to understand the popularity of these heresies, we need to understand the larger social, political, and intellectual context. Even as Gothic cathedrals dazzled and dominated large city centres, the church at the same time was being criticised by people, ordinary peasants, as well as the nobility, who complained about the unchristian lives of the higher clergy and who had lost confidence in popes and bishops. The theological debates in universities seemed remote from their lives, and most people did not understand Latin, and Mass could be an alien experience. The church did not seem to answer the fundamental question. In a world that had radically changed with urbanization, commercialization, what did it mean to be a good Christian? That is, what liberty, new types of freedoms, new prosperity, monastic life held little appeal, and most people were no longer attracted to the ascetic life demanded by Benedictine rule. And do notice that in these years, the new orders that emerged, like the Franciscans, are not secluded in monastery, but wandering and in the world. Therefore, the fundamental problem of medieval Christianity was how could an individual reconcile their worldly endeavors with their spiritual needs? How to express one's beliefs and fulfill one's spiritual needs, which the church, which had become involved in large aspects of people's lives, exercised such rigid social control. For religion was not to be questioned or abandoned. What was challenged, however, was the authority of the church. And this is what we see with the heresies that emerged in the 12th and 13th centuries. For example, heretical groups in Milan who in 1030 preferred burning at the stake rather than recant their beliefs, or the fact that many nobles joined ranks of heresies. This was a way to contest papal authority, and it could also be used to critique lay powers. And many heretics made efforts, in fact, to recruit women. The most popular heresies, which your textbook discusses, were the Waldensian and Albigensians, or Cathars. Your textbook discusses these, and I will add some information. In the case of the Waldensians, what one sees is that around 1175, in the city of Lyon in France, which was already a hotbed of Christian heresy, Peter Waldo commissioned a poor student to translate the Gospels in French. And as your textbook explains, he took seriously the message of the gospel to practice poverty and sold everything he had. A Christian lay movement rapidly grew around him. The main activity of the Waldensian was reading of the Bible in the vernacular and a life in strict imitation of Christ. Think of how this challenged church practice. They were also opposed to relics and the cult of saints. They would not honor or pray the dead. They would rather pray in a barn than in a church and despised cathedrals. For the Waldensians, a vernacular Bible, vernacular prayers and songs, a communal life, schools of their own, and well-organized missionary work were central, and they rapidly spread to Italy, southern France, and Spain. So what began as a popular revolt soon turned into a heresy, and the papacy condemned them, excommunicating and persecuting them. The Waldensians had much in common with the Cathars, the Albigensians, the most popular heretic movement. Cathars mean pure, and the church saw them as more dangerous than the Waldensians, so much so that it initiated a crusade against Christians within Europe. The Albigensian Crusade, your textbook discusses. Who were the Cathars? They built upon ideas that predated Christianity. Between 1150 and 1250, they built 16 churches, 6 in Italy, 6 in Constantinople, and 4 in France. They rejected almost everything associated with the church at the time. They rejected the existing political authority of kings and princes, the death penalty, the taking of oaths, and they were pacifist. They rejected war. Most importantly, they rejected the material world as evil. This means they rejected baptism, which was intended to wash men and women of sins. Because water was of this world, and therefore evil. And to them, the soul must be freed from the material world, not joined to it. The Cathars instead initiated a different form of baptism. The convert first must undergo an extensive period of training, instruction, and total abstinence from pleasure. Remember the ascetic ideal of early Christianity. Indulgence in the flesh was regarded as a crime, and physical contact of any kind was forbidden. Milk, eggs, and cheese could not be consumed because they were the products of animal procreation. And converts had to fast 3 times a year for 40 days each. And they believed in dying by their own hands because they practiced salvation. Strikingly, they won thousands of converts, especially in southern France, where they became most popular. And this would lead to the Albigensian Crusades. Now, the last order that emerged was not strictly heretic, but it was often very close to it. It was the order of the Franciscans, which by the time of Francis' death in 1226 had more than 5,000 Franciscans. Now, all of these movements show an incredible spiritual and intellectual vitality, but the church did not see it this way and saw them as a direct attack on its authority and power. So much so that in 1215, Pope Innocent III painted an alarming picture of a church dissolving in the sea of heresy, and devised the Fourth Lateran Council, which would become a watershed in the religious life of the Middle Ages, and that what we'll discuss in the next chapter. This means that with the flourishing came incredible violence. The Crusades, within and outside Europe, the Reconquista of Spain as well. Now, if we think of the Middle Ages, we should remember that this was an age of violence. So violence was not new. The historian David Nirenberg has argued that violence was central and a systemic aspect of coexistence of the majority with religious minorities, even in Islamic space. So coexistence was predicated upon social violence. So this was not an opposition between tolerance and intolerance, but how tolerance came with social violence. In fact, violence was a common and acceptable way of settling disputes in medieval Spain and was not seen as the breakdown of social relations. For example, in Valencian law, the physical actions were explicitly permitted if one's opponent refused to provide legal satisfaction. And not all violence was physical. That is, for instance, one could make someone flee a town, go into exile. This is why I say social violence. But there is something new in the Middle Ages. That is, violence between different religious groups. Think about crusades against Muslims. Think about the massacres of Jews during the First Crusades. And think about the Albigensian Crusades. The first time violence will be exercised against Christians by Christians.